Hey, what's up everybody? Pastor Matt here. Hey, I wanted to do a little mini-series on Bible translation. That's a topic of great concern to a lot of believers. It's also a topic in which there is a little bit of argumentation from time to time. And so in this mini-series, I'm going to do 3 videos, and I'm going to share with you why I read the 3 translations that I read. And so to let the cat out of the bag early, the translations that I'm going to talk about are number 1 in this video, the King James Version of the Bible. Number 2 in the second video I'm going to do will be the English Standard Version, or the ESV. And then finally in the third video we'll talk about the New King James Version, the KJV. So why I read each one of those 3. Now if you're a KJV only person here to be combative and argue that the King James is the only Bible of God's people, especially in the English world or for any language for that matter, you'll probably find yourself a little bit disappointed and frustrated because I don't believe that the King James Version is the only Bible translation. However, I do believe it is an excellent Bible translation, and I do love it and cherish it in my own life, not only for reading devotionally, for prayer purposes, but even for preaching from time to time. I love to pull out the King James Version of the Bible. So let's talk about that one first, since that is probably the standard text. It is called the Authorized Version, the King James Version, translated from the originals in 1611. So this is a very old translation. And one of the things I appreciate about it most is the beauty of the translation. It is an absolutely gorgeous text to read. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a King James, and I'm going to read to you from one of my favorite places to read, which would be the Psalms, especially the Psalms in the 90s, just to give you a little bit of taste of what the King James sounds like and why I think it's so beautiful. Listen to this. This is Psalm 95. Come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The strength of the hills is his also. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the land. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God and Maker. It's a beautiful translation. Now you probably already know, however, that this translation, as beautiful and poetic as it is to read, does come with some different words that we're not used to in our common contemporary English, like the these and the thous. Listen, man, don't get tripped up on that. You've probably said, hey, I can't read it because of the these and the thous. Get over it. It's really easy once you get going with it. And it's a very, very beautiful translation, probably one of the best to read out loud, spoken. Read it out loud, read it devotionally. The King James is beautiful. Number 2, it's very precise. You may not know this about the King James, or maybe you already do, which is why you already like it. But the King James Version is a very precise, literal translation of the Greek and the Hebrew. In fact, if you were learning to translate from the Greek, for instance, you would find that the King James Version very faithfully renders almost word for word from the original Greek text. And so it is known for its precision, which is why many of the older biblical commentators used it so faithfully, and why it stuck around for so many years is because of its precision and its grandeur. Third, I would say that the King James Version it's an intellectual version. And what I mean by that is if you want to consider yourself an intelligent person, a well-read person, you should be familiar with the King James Bible. After all, it is the Bible of the English-speaking world, predominantly, almost exclusively, for several hundred years. And so here you are, you're not watching Netflix, you're not watching Game of Thrones, you're watching the videos of a guy who primarily talks about Bible theology and books. Okay, so you're already an intellectual person. And if you haven't read the King James Version, well, that's a gap that's missing in your knowledge field. You should at least read through the King James Version one time, completely, all the way through in your life. Okay, fourth, the King James Version is a historic version of the Bible. And what I mean by that is this. If you are to begin reading men like Charles Spurgeon, Jonathan Edwards, some of the great Puritan divines, you are no doubt going to get yourself deep into the King James Version of the Bible. And so when we read the King James, it's really cool for me to think about the fact that we're reading the same translation that Spurgeon preached from. We're reading the same translation that Jonathan Edwards preached from, and the great revivalists. And George Whitefield, when he went through the colonies, preached from what? The King James Version. And so there's a connectivity, which I greatly enjoy, to the saints, the faithful men who've gone before us. And that brings me to my fifth point, which is that the King James Version is confessional. It's confessional. I don't know if you know this, but if you're Reformed and Presbyterian like I am, the Westminster Confession of Faith in 1647 used the King James Version for all of its proof texts. And so the language of the confessions, the Puritan confessions, is no doubt going to be just rippling through with themes and words and phrases from the King James Version. So it is confessional. Sixth, it is a universal translation. And while it is falling out of favor in some camps, the King James Version still celebrates a very wide usage across denominational lines. The King James Version is used in conservative Presbyterian churches. It's used in Baptist churches. It's used in Anglican churches, in Lutheran churches, in non-denominational churches. It is read and used around the world in English-speaking churches still to this day, even though there's some weirdness in the language. And then finally this, seventh, this is a permanent text. And what I like about that is there are no revisions of the King James Version. Now, of course, there's the RSV and the ASV and the New King James. Those are technically revisions. But the King James Version itself is not being updated. So we need not to fear that if one person pulls out a King James and the other pulls out a King James, that we're going to be reading from different texts. So there's a unity and a harmony to that. Now I realize that there's some objections to the King James. Some people would say that the manuscripts are inferior to those that we know of today, and that's a whole argument that we may address in the other videos. And other people would say that sometimes the King James Version just sounds weird when it uses words like straightway or forthwith. But you know what? Peradventure, there's another one. But you know what? Those strange and unusual words, when we come to them in the King James, what they actually cause us to do is to slow down our reading and to pay attention to what the text is saying. And believe it or not, being a slow reader is actually a virtue. Being a slow reader means that you're paying faithful attention to what is being said and that you're emphasizing comprehension rather than speed. So if the King James slows you down, don't worry about that. Look up a word every once in a while. You'll find that your reading is amplified and enhanced by the highly devotional quality that is the King James Version of the Scriptures. All right, so in the next couple of videos, we're going to look at the ESV, and then we're going to look at the New King James. But for those of you who are interested in reading the King James through for the first time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post some links in the description of this video of some King James Bibles that I've found helpful in my reading process. I'll mention some that are very cheap that you can get very easily if you don't have a King James, and then I'll mention some of the study Bibles of King James, and then I'll mention maybe a couple of higher-end King James if you'd like to get one that's going to last forever for your family and your children and your grandchildren. All right, thanks for checking in. Look for the ESV and NKJV videos coming up as well. Thanks for checking in. Love you.